After we took our first Afghan prisoners, we started to realize that the Americans were not there. We said, Americans? What Americans? They're not here. But the KGB officers said, oh, they're in the rear. They're advising the Mujahideen just like we advised in Cuba. Maybe they're teaching them how to fight. But the more operations we carried out, the more we realized that the Americans were not there.
Against their wishes, the Soviets were soon sucked into combat. They started with textbook sweep offensives, devised to defeat NATO in Europe and Chinese troops on the plains of Manchuria. In mountainous terrain against guerrilla fighters, their approach was a disaster.
Well, I would say 99% of all the battles that we fought in Afghanistan were won by the Soviet side. But the problem is that the next morning we had the same old situation as if there was no battle. Mujahideen were again in that village where they were. We thought we destroyed them just the other day. So it was an absolutely useless war.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
A fervent anti-communist, Ronald Reagan won the 1980 election with an image of forceful leadership and a promise to rebuild U.S. military might. To many Americans, Carter's foreign policy had seemed weak. Reagan stepped up aid to the Afghan rebels. The Mujahideen were made up of numerous factions. They were split on tribal and ethnic lines. When the Mujahideen weren't fighting the Soviets, they sometimes fought each other.
Allahu Akbar!
The Mujahideen often captured military equipment in working order, but was so disorganized that within hours it would be made useless by looting.
I made the comment that gratitude in the Afghan dictionary is going to be found somewhere after gimme and gotcha. On the other hand, there was a constant undercurrent of understanding that while we were providing the means to wage this war, they were waging it. And that it is entirely true that this was a war that was fought with our gold, but with their blood.
The Reagan administration increased its covert military supplies to the Mujahideen. Money and arms were channeled through camps in Pakistan. By controlling the way aid was distributed, the Pakistanis hoped to install a fundamentalist regime in Afghanistan. They favored the extremist Gulbuddin Hekmatyar.
The Pakistanis then needed to have people that they could manipulate. It is for that reason that American aid, whatever it was, and in the early period it was minimal, later it became more significant, was essentially directed by the Pakistanis to Gulbuddin at the expense of other groups.
The arms were not distributed fairly. Despite our military successes, Pakistan only gave us 8 missiles. For 2 years, they cut all aid to my group. The Pakistanis had their own agenda. They gave the lion's share of weapons to the hardliner, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar.
Inside Afghanistan, the ferocity of the civil war increased. After heavy casualties, the Red Army changed tactics. They abandoned massive armored sweeps and took to the air. Soviet commanders would be dropped in by helicopters to cut the Mujahideen's escape routes. While more weapons poured into Afghanistan, the United Nations sought a diplomatic solution. Under-Secretary Diego Cordoves tried to broker a deal for the Soviet Union to withdraw if military aid to the Mujahideen was stopped. His shuttle diplomacy made little headway with Afghan President Babrak Karmal. Moscow, November 1982. After 18 years in power, Brezhnev is dead. The state funeral was used for a new Afghan initiative. After the ceremony, Yuri Andropov, the new Soviet president, told Pakistan's foreign minister that he might accept the United Nations plan. But the Americans didn't trust Andropov.
We never considered that the Soviets would actually back out of Afghanistan and negotiate their way out. It didn't seem a credible thing for them to do, because we didn't think that they were at all disposed to do that. So naturally, when we talked with the Pakistanis, we pressed them always to continue the pressure.
The Bible tells us there will be a time for peace. But so far this century, mankind has failed to find it. In these times when...
The United States and Pakistan were not ready for a deal with Moscow. For Washington, the UN's peace plan was a sideshow.
The peace-loving nations of the world must condemn aggression.
Throughout Afghanistan, Soviet aircraft were now bombing indiscriminately. They pummeled village after village into oblivion. In a typical attack on April the 8th, 1985, the villages of Kutz and Mindrawar on the Kabul-Jalalabad highway were bombed, then overrun by Soviet troops.
The Soviets destroyed the whole village. It's impossible to count how many they killed. The men were dragged out of their houses and sent off to the Afghan army. Those who refused were taken aside and gunned down, butchered.
The
Russians took 14 of us and made us stand in a line near this wall. 2 Russian soldiers stood in front of us with machine guns. We began reciting the Holy Kalima from the Holy Quran because we knew we were about to die. They machine-gunned every one of us. I fell. There was a pile of bodies all on top of me. The bullets missed me. The soldiers searched us and took our money. They moved me, but I just pretended to be dead.